Greetings, loves. Welcome to our book reading. And this is our first night of reading. And we are reading the Miseducation of the Negro. And this is our first night of reading. And we are reading the Miseducation of the Negro. And this is our first night of reading. And we are reading the Miseducation of the Negro.
Okay, excuse me for the feedback. Okay. So no one is here yet, right? So I am going to continue to play music. I'm going to send out links and okay. So I will continue to play the music and allow everyone a chance to gather themselves and come in. Okay, everyone. All right. And thank you guys for joining. And this is the Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. And the links have been sent out. This is the beginning of the reading of this book. And it may be a little late for some. So the next time I will try and make this a little earlier in the day so you guys can join in on the actual reading. And I did have a suggestion by one member that we'd be able to have articles with this reading. So we may be incorporating that in with this session in the future. So for tonight, so far, we're just going to be doing the reading. And these readings will be approximately an hour long each, so that you won't have to worry about them being, too far along, taking up too much of your time all at once. And I will be doing the readings each Wednesday until we are through with this book, and then I will post other books for you guys to choose from, and you guys can vote on the next reading. Okay, so again, this is The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson, and I will start the reading. And if you guys will click the like button as you come in, I would greatly appreciate it. And I will start with the foreword of the book. And the foreword reads, "The thoughts brought together in this volume have been expressed in recent addresses and articles written by the author. From time to time, persons deeply interested in the point of view therein presented have requested that these comments on education be made available in book form. To supply this demand, the volume is given to the public. In the preparation of the volume, the author has not followed in detail the productions upon which the book is based. The aim is to set forth only the thought developed in passing from one to the other. The language in some cases, then, is entirely new, and the work is not a collection of essays. In this way, repetition has been avoided except to emphasize the thesis which the author sustains." Carter G. Woodson, Washington, D.C., January 1933. Preface. Herein are recorded not options but the reflections of one who for 40 years has participated in the education of the black, brown, yellow, and white races in both hemispheres and in tropical and temperate regions. Such experience, too, has been with students in all grades from the kindergarten to the university. The author, moreover, has traveled around the world to observe not only modern school systems in various countries, but to study the special systems set up by private agencies and governments to educate the narratives in their colonies and dependencies. Some of these observations, too, have been checked against more recent studies on a later tour. Discussing herein the mistakes made in the education of the Negro, the writer frankly admits that he has committed some of these errors himself. In several chapters, moreover, he specifically points out wherein himself has strayed from the path of wisdom. This book, then, is not intended as a broadside against any particular person or class, but it is given as a corrective for methods which have not produced satisfactory results. The author does not support the once popular view that in matters of education, Negroes are rightfully subjected to the will of others on the presumption that these poor people are not large taxpayers and must be content with charitable contributions to their uplift. The author takes the position that the consumer pays the tax, and as such, every individual of the social order should be given unlimited opportunity to make the most of himself. Such opportunity, too, should not be determined from without by forces set to direct the prescribed element in a way to redound solemnly to the good of others, but should be determined by the makeup of the Negro himself and by what his environment requires of him. This new program of uplift, the author contends, should not be decided upon by trial and error method in the application of devices used in dealing with others in a different situation at another epoch, only by careful study of the Negro himself, the life which he is forced to lead, can we arrive at the proper procedure in this crisis. The mere imparting of information is not education. Above all things, the effort must result in making a man think and do for himself, just as the Jews have done in spite of universal persecution. In thus estimating the results obtained from the so-called education of the Negro, the author does not go to the census figures to show the progress of race. It may be of no importance to the race to be able to boast today of many times as many educated members as it had in 1865. If they are of the wrong kind, the increase in numbers will be a disadvantage rather than an advantage. The only question which concerns us here is whether these educated persons are actually equipped to face the ordeal before them, or unconsciously contribute to their own undoing by perpetuating the regime of the oppressor. Herein, however, lies no argument for the oft-heard contention that education for the white man should mean one thing for the Negro, a different thing. The element of race does not enter here. It is merely a matter of exercising common sense and approaching people through their environment in order to deal with the conditions as they are rather than as you would like to see them or imagine that they are. There may be a difference in the method of attack, but the principle remains the same. Highly educated Negroes denounce persons who advocate for the Negro, a sort of education different in some respects from that now given the white man. Negroes who have been so long inconvenienced and denied opportunities for development are naturally afraid of anything that sounds like discrimination. They are anxious to have everything the white man has, even if it's harmful. The possibility of originality in the Negro, therefore, is discounted 100% to maintain a nominal equality. If the whites decide to take up Mormonism, the Negroes must follow their lead. If the whites neglect such a study, then the Negroes must do likewise. The author, however, does not have such an attitude. He considers the educational system as it has developed both in Europe and America an antiquated process, which does not hit the mark even if the case of the needs of the white man himself. If the white man wants to hold on to it, let him do so. But the Negro, so far as he is able, should develop and carry out a program of his own. The so-called modern education, with all its defects, however, does others so much more good than it does the Negro, because it has been worked out in conformity to the needs of those who have enslaved and oppressed weaker peoples. For example, the philosophy and ethics resulting from our educational system have justified slavery, peonage, segregation, and lynching. The oppressor has the right to exploit, to handicap, and to kill the oppressed. Negroes, daily educated in the tenets of such a religion of the strong, have accepted the status of the weak as divinely ordained, and during the last 3 generations of their nominal freedom, they have done practically nothing to change it. Their pouting and resolutions indulged in by a few of their race have been of little avail. No systematic effort towards change has been possible, for taught the same economics, history, philosophy, literature, and religion which have established the present code of morals. The Negro's mind has been brought under the control of his oppressor. The problem of holding the Negro down, therefore, is easily solved. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and he will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He will go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary. The same educational process which inspires and stimulates the oppressor with the thought that he is everything and has accomplished everything worthwhile, depresses and crushes at the same time the spark of genius in the Negro by making him feel that his race does not amount to much and never will measure up to the standards of other peoples. The Negro, thus educated, is a hopeless liability of the race. The difficulty is that the educated Negro is compelled to live and move among his own people, whom he has been taught to despise. As a rule, therefore, the educated Negro prefers to buy his food from a white grocer because he has been taught that the Negro is not clean. It does not matter how often a Negro washes his hands, then he cannot clean them. And it does not matter how often a white man uses his hands, he cannot soil them. The educated Negro, moreover, is disinclined to take part in Negro business because he has been taught in economics that Negroes cannot operate in this particular sphere. The educated Negro gets less and less pleasure out of the Negro church, not on account of its primitiveness and increasing corruption, but because of his preference for the seats of righteousness controlled by his oppressor. This has been his education, and nothing else can be expected of him. If the educated Negro could go off and be white, he might be happy. But only a mulatto now and then can do this. The large majority of this class then must go through life denouncing white people because they are trying to run away from the blacks and decrying the blacks because they are not white. Okay, so not back here. All right, chapter 1, the seat of the trouble. The educated Negroes have the attitude of contempt towards their own people because in their own as well as in their mixed schools, Negroes are taught to admire the Hebrew, the Greek, the Latin, and the Teuton, and to despise the African. One of the hundreds of Negro high schools recently examined by an expert in the United States Bureau of Education, only 18 offer a course taking out the history of the Negro, and in most of the Negro colleges and universities where the Negro is thought of, the race is studied only as a problem or dismissed as of little consequence. For example, an officer of Negro University, thinking that an additional course on the Negro should be given there, called upon a Negro doctor of philosophy of the faculty to offer such work. He promptly informed the officer that he knew nothing about the Negro. He did not go to school to waste his time that way. He went to be educated into a system which dismisses the Negro as nonentity. At a Negro summer school 2 years ago, a white instructor gave a course on the Negro, using for his text a work which teaches that whites are superior to blacks. When asked by one of his students why he used such a textbook, the instructor replied that he wanted them to get the point of view. Even schools for Negroes, then, are places where they must be convinced of their inferiority. The thought of the inferiority of the Negro is drilled into him in almost every class he enters and in almost every book he studies. If he happens to leave school after he masters the fundamentals, before he finishes high school or reaches college, he will naturally escape some of this bias and may recover in time to be of service to his people. Practically all of the successful Negroes in this country are of the uneducated type, are that of the Negroes who have had no formal education at all. The large majority of Negroes who have put on the finishing touches of our best colleges are all but worthless in the development of their people. If after leaving school they have the opportunity to give out to Negroes what Trotters of the race would like to have it learned, such persons may thereby earn a living at teaching or preaching what they have been taught, but they never become a constructive force in the development of race. The so-called school then becomes a questionable factor in the life of this despised people. As another has well said, to handicap a student by teaching him that his black face is a curse and that his struggle to change his condition is hopeless is the worst sort of lynching. It kills one's aspirations, and change his condition is hopeless is the worst sort of lynching. It dooms him to vagabondage and crime. It is strange, then, that the friends of truth and the promoters of freedom have not risen up against the present propaganda in the schools and crushed it. This crusade is much more important than the anti lynching movement because there would be no lynching if it did not start in the schoolroom. Why not exploit, enslave, and exterminate a class that everybody is taught to regard as inferior? To be more explicit, we may go to the seat of the trouble. Our most widely known scholars have been trained in universities outside of the South. Northern and Western institutions, however, have had no time to deal with matters which concern the Negro especially. They must direct their attention to the problems of the majority of their constituents, and too often they have stimulated their prejudices by referring to the Negro as unworthy of consideration. Most of what these universities have offered as language, mathematics, and science may have served a good purpose, but much of what they have taught as economics, history, literature, religion, and philosophy is propaganda and can involve a waste of time and misdirected the Negroes thus trained. Even in the certitude of science or mathematics, it has been unfortunate that the approach to the Negro has been borrowed from a foreign method. For example, the teaching of arithmetic in the fifth grade in a backward county in Mississippi should mean one thing in a Negro school and a decidedly different thing in a white school. The Negro children, as a rule, come from the homes of tenants and peons who have to migrate annually from a plantation to a plantation looking for light, which they have never seen. The children from the homes of white planters and merchants live permanently in the midst of calculations, family budgets, and the like, which enable them sometimes to learn more by contact than a Negro can acquire in school. Instead of teaching such a Negro less arithmetic, they should be taught more of it than the white children. For the latter, attend a grade school consolidated by free transportation, when the Negroes go to one room rented hovels to be taught without equipment and by incompetent teachers educated scarcely beyond the eighth grade. In schools of theology, Negroes are taught the interpretation of the Bible, worked out by those who have justified segregation and winked at the economic debasement of the Negro, sometimes almost to the point of starvation. Deriving their sense of right from this teaching, graduates of such schools can have no message to grip the people who they have been ill trained to serve. Most of this, most of such miseducated ministers, therefore, preach to benches while illiterate Negro preachers do their best while they can in supplying the spiritual needs of the masses. In the schools of business administration, Negroes are trained exclusively in the psychology and economics of Wall Street and are therefore made to despise the opportunities to run ice wagons, push banana carts, and sell peanuts among their own people. Foreigners who have not studied economics but have studied Negroes take up their business and grow rich. In schools of journalism, Negroes are taught how to edit such metropolitan dailies as the Chicago Tribune and the New York Times, which will hardly hire a Negro as a janitor. And when these graduates come to the Negro weeklies for employment, they are not prepared to function in such establishments, which, to be successful, must be built upon accurate knowledge of the psychology and philosophy of the Negro. When a Negro has finished his education in our schools, then he has been equipped to begin the life of an Americanized or Europeanized white man. But before he steps to begin the life from the threshold of his alma mater, he is told by his teachers that he must go back to his own people from whom he has been estranged by a vision of ideals, which in his disillusionment he will realize that he cannot attain. He goes forth to play his part in life, but he must be both social and bisocial at the same time. While he is a part of the body politic, he is in addition to this member of a particular race to which he must restrict himself in all matters social. While serving his country, he must serve within a special group. While being a good American, he must above all things be a good Negro. And to perform this definite function, he must learn to stay in a Negro's place. For the arduous task of serving a race thus handicapped, however, the Negro graduate has had little or no training at all. The people whom he has been ordered to serve have been belittled by his teachers to the extent that he can hardly find delight in undertaking what his education has led him to think is impossible. Considering his race as blank in achievement, then he sets out to stimulate their imitation of others. The performance is kept up a while, but like any other effort at meaningless imitation, it results in failure. Facing this undesirable result, the highly educated Negro often grows sour. He becomes too pessimistic to be a constructive force and usually develops into a chronic fault finder or a complaint at the bar of a public opinion. Often, when he sees that the fault lies at the door of the white oppressor whom he is afraid to attack, he turns upon the pioneering Negro who is at work doing the best he can to extricate himself from the uncomfortable predicament. In this effort to intimidate, however, these educated people are sincere. They hope to make the Negro conform quickly to the standard of the whites and thus remove the pretext for the barriers between the races. They do not realize, however, that even if the Negroes do successfully imitate the whites, nothing new has therefore been accomplished. You simply have a larger number of persons doing what others have been doing. The unusual gifts of the race have not thereby been developed, and an unwilling world therefore continues to wonder what the Negro is good for. These educated people, however, decry any such thing as race consciousness, and in some respects, they are right. They do not like to hear such expressions as Negro literature, Negro poetry, African art, or thinking black. And roughly speaking, we must concede that such things do not exist. These things did not figure in the courses which they pursued in school, and why should they? Aren't we all Americans? Then whatever is American is as much as the heritage of the Negro as of any other group in this country. The highly educated contend, moreover, that when the Negro emphasizes these things, he invites racial discrimination by recognizing such differences in the races. The thought that the Negro is one thing and the white man another is the stock in trade argument of the Caucasian to justify segregation. Why then should the Negro blame the white man for doing what he himself does? These highly educated Negroes, however, fail to see that it is not the Negro who takes this position. The white man forces him to it, and to extricate himself therefrom, the Negro leader must so deal with the situation as to develop in the segregated group the power with which they can elevate themselves. The differences of races, moreover, is no evidence of superiority or inferiority. This merely indicates that each race has certain gifts which the others do not possess. It is by the development of these gifts that every race must justify its right to exist. Chapter 2. How we missed the mark. How we have arrived at the present state of affairs can be understood only by studying the forces effective in development of Negro education, since it was systematically undertaken immediately after emancipation. To point out merely the defects as they appear today would be of little benefit to the present and future generations. These things must be viewed in their historic setting. The conditions of today have been determined by what has taken place in the past, and in a careful study of the history, we may see more clearly the great theater of events in which the Negro has played a part. We may understand better what his role has been and how well he has functioned in it. The idea of educating the Negroes after the Civil War was largely a prompting of philanthropy. Their white neighbors failed to assume the responsibility. These black people had been liberated as a result of a sectional conflict out of which their former owners had emerged as victims. From this class, then, the freedmen could not expect much sympathy or cooperation in their effort to prepare themselves to figure as citizens of a modern republic. For from functionaries of the United States government itself, and from those who participated in the conquest of the secessionists. Early came the plan of teaching these freedmen, the simple duties of life as worked out by the Freedmen's Bureau and the philanthropic agencies. When systemized, this effort became a program for the organization of churches and schools and the direction of them along the lines which had been considered most conducive to the progress of people otherwise circumstanced. Here and there, some variations was made in this program in view of the fact that the status of the freedom in no way paralleled that of their friends and teachers, but such thought was not general. When the Negroes in some way would learn to perform the duties which other elements of the population had prepared themselves to discharge, they would be duly qualified. It was believed to function as citizens of the country. Inasmuch as most Negroes lived in the agricultural South, moreover, and only a few of them at first acquired small farms, there was little in their life which any of them thought could not have easily understood. The poverty which afflicted them for a generation after emancipation held them down to the lowest order of society, nominally free, but economically enslaved. The participation of the freedmen in government for a few years during the period known as the Reconstruction had little bearing on their situation, except they did join with the uneducated poor whites to bring about a certain much desired social reforms, especially in giving the South its first plan of democratic education and providing for a school system at public expense. Neither this inadequately supported school system nor the struggling higher institution of a classical order established about the same time, however, connected the Negroes were very closely with life as it was. These institutions were concerned rather with life as they hoped to make it. When the Negro found himself deprived of influence in politics, therefore, and at the same time unprepared to participate in the higher functions in the industrial development which this country began to undergo, it soon became evident to him that he was losing ground in the basic things of life. He was spending his time studying about the things which had been or might be, but he was learning little to help him to do better the task at hand. Since the Negroes believed that the causes of this untoward condition lay without the race, migration was attempted, and immigration to Africa was again urged. At this psychological moment came the wave of industrial education, which swept the country by storm. The educational authorities in the cities and states throughout the Black Belt began to change the course of study to make the training of the Negro conform to this policy. The missionary teachers from the North, in defense to their idea of more liberal training, however, fearlessly attacked this new educational policy, and the Negroes' participation in the same dispute arrayed themselves respectively on one side or the other. For a generation thereafter, the quarrel as to whether the Negro should be given a classical or a practical education was the dominant topic in Negro schools and churches throughout the United States. Labor was the most important thing of life. It was argued practical education counted in reaching that end, and the Negro worker must be taught to solve this problem of efficiency before directing attention to other things. Others, more narrow minded than the advocates of industrial education, seized upon the idea, feeling that although the Negro must have some semblance of education, it would be a fine stroke to be able to make a distinction between the training given to the Negro and that provided for the whites. Inasmuch as the industrial education idea rapidly gained ground, too many Negroes, for political purposes, began to espouse it, and schools and colleges, hoping thereby to obtain money, worked out accordingly makeshift provisions for such instruction, although they could not satisfactorily offer it. A few real industrial schools actually equipped themselves for this work and turned out a number of graduates with such preparation. Unfortunately, however, the affair developed into a sort of battle of words. For in spite of it all, they said and did the majority of the Negroes, those who did make some effort to obtain an education, did not actually receive either the industrial or the classical education. Negroes attended industrial schools, took such training, and was prescribed and received their diplomas, but few of them developed adequate efficiency to be able to do what they were supposedly trained to do. The schools in which they were educated could not provide for all the experience which machinery, which with white apprentices trained in factories had. Such industrial education as these Negroes received then was merely to master a technique already discarded in progressive centuries and even in less complicated operations of industry. These schools had no such facilities as to parallel the numerous processes of factories conducted on the plan of the division of labor, except what value such training might have in the development of the mind by making practical applications of mathematics and science, then it was a failure. The majority of Negro graduates in industrial schools, therefore, have gone into other avenues, and too often into those for which they had no preparation whatsoever. Some few who actually prepared for the industrial sphere by self-improvement likewise sought other occupations for the reason that Negroes were generally barred from higher pursuits by trade unions, and being unable to develop captains of industry to increase the demand for person in these lines, the Negro have not opened up many such opportunities for themselves. During these years, too, the schools for the classical education for Negroes have not done any better. They have proceeded on the basis that every ambitious person needs a liberal education, when as a matter of fact, this does not necessarily follow. The Negro trained in advanced phases of literature, philosophy, and politics has been unable to develop far in using his knowledge because of having to function in the lower spheres of the social order. Advanced knowledge of science, mathematics, and languages, moreover, has not been much more useful except for mental discipline because of the dearth of opportunity to apply such knowledge among people who were largely common laborers in towns of peons on the plantations. The extent to which such higher education has been successful in leading the Negro to think, which above all is the chief purpose of education, has merely made him more of a malcontent when he can sense the drift of things and appreciate the impossibility of success in visioning conditions as they really are. It is very clear, therefore, that we do not have in the life of the Negro today a large number of persons who have been benefited by either of the systems about which we have quarreled so long. The number of Negro mechanics and artisans have comparatively declined during the last 2 generations. The Negroes do not proportionately represent as many skilled laborers as they did before the Civil War. If the practical education which the Negroes received helped to improve the situation, so that it is today no worse than what it is, certainly it did not solve the problem as was expected of it. On the other hand, in spite of much classical education of the Negroes, we do not find in the race a large supply of thinkers and philosophers. One excuse is that scholarship among Negroes has been vitiated by the necessity for all of them to combat segregation and fight to retain standing ground in the struggle of races. Comparatively, few American Negroes have produced credible literature, and still fewer have made any large contribution to philosophy or science. They have not risen to the heights of black men, farther removed from the influences of slavery and segregation. For this reason, we do not find among American Negroes a Pushkin, a Gomez, a Geoffrey, a Capitan, or a Dumas. Even men like Roland Hayes and Henry O. Chatter have risen to the higher levels by getting out of this country to relieve themselves of our stifling traditions and to recover their education. So I'm going to take this time to greet anyone who has joined. Greetings, Deek. Thank you for joining us in the chat. And so far, you're the only person that I see who has joined. And we have about another half hour to go, guys. And we are on chapter 3. And just so you guys know, I will be adding these to a playlist so that we could, if you've missed any of the chapters, you will be able to pull them up with the playlist, and you can have access to all of them. You should be able to have access to all of them from the link that you have. So, and also, this is my first time reading this book too, so so far it's very educational. Yes. All right. So, chapter 3, how we drifted away from the truth. Okay.
Yes. All right.
Okay, so I see Lionheart is in the chat as well. My Bluetooth has died. All right, chapter 3, how we drifted away from the truth. How then did the education of the Negro take such a trend? The people who maintained the school's education for certain Negroes before the Civil War were certainly sincere, and so were the missionary workers who went south to enlighten the freedmen after the results of that conflict had given the Negroes a new status. These earnest workers, however, had more enthusiasm than knowledge. They did not understand the task before them. This undertaking, too, was more of an effort towards social uplift than actual education. Their aim was to transform the Negroes, not to develop them. The freedmen who were enlightened were given little thought for the best friends of the race, ill taught themselves, followed the traditional curricula of the times, which did not take the Negro into consideration except to condemn or pity him. In geography, the races were described in conformity with the program of the unusual propaganda to engender the race, the whites. Okay, this is a paperback, so I lost my fold. To engender in whites a race hate of the Negro, and in the Negroes contempt for themselves. A poet of distinction was selected to illustrate the physical features of the white race. A Beckett chief of tribe, those of the red, a proud warrior of the brown, a prince of the yellow, and a savage with a ring in his nose. The black Negro. The Negro, of course, stood at the foot of the social ladder. The description of the various parts of the world was worked out according to the same plan. The parts inhabited by the Caucasian were treated in detail. Less attention was given to the yellow people, still less to the red, very little to the brown, and practically none to the black race. These people who were far removed from the physical characteristics of the Caucasians, or who do not materially assist them in the domination or exploitation of others, were not mentioned except to be belittled or decried. From the teaching of science, the Negro was likewise eliminated. The beginnings of science in various parts of the Orient were mentioned, but the Africans' early advancement in this field were omitted. Students were not told that ancient Africans' early advancement in this field, uh, students were not told that ancient Africans of the inferiority knew sufficient science to concoct poisons for our heads, to mix durable colors for paintings, to extract metals from nature and refine them for development in the industrial arts. Very little was said about the chemistry and the method of the Egyptian embalming, which was the product of the mixing breeds of northern Africa, now known in the modern world as colored people. And the study of language in school pupils were made to scoff at the Negro dialect as some peculiar possession of the Negro, which they said should despise rather than direct, to study the background of this language as a broken down African tongue. In short, to understand their own linguistic history, which is certainly more important for them than the study of French phonetics or historical Spanish grammar. To the African language as such, no attention was given in case of the preparation of traders, missionaries, and public functionaries to exploit the natives. The number of persons thus trained, of course, constituted a small fraction hardly deserving attention. From literature, the African was excluded altogether. He was not supposed to have expressed any thought worth knowing. The philosophy in the African proverbs and in rich folklore of that content was ignored to give preference to that developed on the distant shores of the Mediterranean. Most missionary teachers of the freedmen, like most men of our time, had never read the interesting books of travel in Africa and had never heard of the Tariq as Sudan. In the teaching of the fine arts, these instructors usually started with Greece by showing how that art was influenced from without, but they omitted the African influence which scientists now regard as significant and dominant in early Hellas. They failed to teach the student the Mediterranean melting pot, with the Negroes from Africa bringing their wares, their ideas, and their blood therein to influence the history of Greece, Carthage, and Rome. Making desire father to the thought, our teachers either ignored these influences or endeavored to belittle them by working out theories to the contrary. The bias did not stop at this point, for it invaded the teaching of the professions. Negro law students were told that they belonged to the most criminal element in the country, and an effort was made to justify the procedure in the seats of injustice where law was interpreted as being one thing for the white man and a different thing for the Negro. And constitutional law in the spinelessness of the United States Supreme Court and permitting the judicial nullification of the 14th and 15th Amendments was and still is boldly upheld in our few law schools. In medical schools, Negroes were likewise convinced of their inferiority and being reminded that their role as germ carriers. The prevalence of syphilis and tuberculosis among Negroes was especially emphasized without showing that these maladies are more deadly among Negroes for the reason that they are Caucasian diseases. And since these plagues are new to Negroes, these sufferers had not had time to develop against them the immunity which time has permitted in the Caucasian. Other diseases to which Negroes easily fall prey were mentioned to point out the race as an undesirable element, when this condition was due to the Negro's economic and social status. Little emphasis was placed upon the immunity of the Negro from the diseases like yellow fever and influenza, which are so disastrous to whites. Yet, the whites were not considered inferior because of this differential resistance to these plagues. In history, of course, the Negro had no place in this curriculum. He was pictured as a human being of the lower order, unable to subject passion to reason, and therefore useful only when made the hewer of wood and the drawer of water for others. No thought was given to the history of Africa except so far as it had been a field of exploitation for the Caucasian. You might study the history as it was offered in our system from the elementary school throughout the university, and you would never hear Africa mentioned except in the negative. You would never thereby learn that Africans first dominated the sheep, the goat, the cow, developed the idea of trial by jury, produced the first string instruments, and gave the world its greatest boon in the discovery of iron. You would never know that prior to the Mohammedan invasion in 1000 AD, these natives in the heart of Africa had developed powerful kingdoms which were later organized by the Songhai Empire on the order that the Romans and boasting of similar grandeur. Unlike the people then, the Negro, according to this point of view, was an exception to the natural plan of things, and he had no such mission as that of an outstanding contribution to culture. The status of the Negro then was justly fixed as that of an inferior. Teachers of Negroes in their first schools after emancipation did not proclaim any such doctrine, but the content of their curricula justified these inferences. An observer from outside of the situation naturally inquires why the Negroes many of whom serve their race as teachers, have not changed this program. These teachers, however, are powerless. Negroes have no control over their education and have little voice in their other affairs pertaining thereto. In a few cases, Negroes have been chosen as members of public boards of education, and some have been appointed members of private boards. But these Negroes are always such a small minority, and they do not figure in the final working out of the educational program. The education of the Negroes, then the most important thing in the uplift of the Negroes, is almost entirely in the hands of those who have enslaved and now segregate them. With miseducated Negroes in control themselves, however, it is doubtful that the system would be very much different from what it is, or that it would rapidly undergo change. The Negroes thus placed in charge would be the products of the same system and would show no more conception to the task at hand than do the whites who have educated them and shaped their minds, as they would have them function. Negro educators of today may have more sympathy and interest in the race than the whites now exploiting Negro institutions as educators, but the former have no more vision than their competitors. Taught from books of the same bias, trained by Caucasians of the same prejudices, are by Negroes of enslaved minds. One generation of Negro teachers after another have served for no higher purpose than to do what they are told to do. In other words, a Negro teacher instructing Negro children and is in many respects a white teacher, thus engaged for the program, in each case is about the same. Wow. Whew. There can be no reasonable objection to the Negroes doing what the white man tells him to do if the white man tells him to do what is right, but right is purely relative. The present system, under the control of the white, trains the Negro to be white at the end, same time convinces him in the impropriety or the impossibility of his becoming white. It compels the Negro to become a good Negro for the performance of which his education is ill suited. For the white man's exploitation of the Negro through economic restriction and segregation, the present system is sound and will doubtless continue until this gives place to the saner policy of actual interracial cooperation, not to the present farce of racial manipulation in which the Negro is a figurehead. History does not furnish a case of the elevation of a people by ignoring the thought and aspiration of the people thus served. This is slightly dangerous ground here. However, for the Negro's mind has been all but perfectly enslaved, and that he has been trained to think what is deserved of him. The highly educated Negroes do not like to hear anything uttered against this procedure because they make their living this way, and they feel that they must defend the system. Few miseducated Negroes ever act otherwise, and if they so express themselves, they are easily crushed by the large majority to the contrary, so that the procession may move on without interruption. The result then is that Negroes thus miseducated are of no service so to themselves and none to the white man. The white man does not need the Negro's professional, commercial, or industrial assistance, and as a result of the multiplication of the mechanical appliances, he no longer needs them in a drudgery or menial service. The highly educated Negroes, moreover, do not need the Negro professional or commercial classes because Negroes have been taught that whites can serve them more efficiently in these spheres. Reduced then to teach and preaching, the Negroes will have no outlets but to go down a blind alley. If the sort of education which they are now receiving is to enable them to find a way out of their present difficulties. Okay, moving on to chapter 4. Education under outside control. In the new program of educating the Negro, what will become of the white teachers of the race? Someone recently inquired. This is a simple question requiring only a brief answer. The remaining few Christian workers who went south not so long after the Civil War and established schools and churches to lay the foundation on which we should now be building more wisely than we do, we will honor as a martyr throng. Anathema be upon him who would utter a word derogatory to the record of these heroes and heroines. We will pay high tribute to also to unselfish Southerners like Haygood, Curry, Ruffner, Northern, and Vance, and to white men of our time who believe that the only way to elevate people is to help them to help themselves. The unfortunate successors of the Northern missionary teachers of Negroes, however, have thoroughly demonstrated that they have no useful function in the life of the Negro. They have not the spirit of their predecessors and do not measure up to the requirements of the educators desired in accredited colleges. If Negro institutions are to be as efficient as those for the whites in the South, the same high standards for the educators to direct them should be maintained. Negro schools cannot go forward with such allowed inefficiency, and especially when the white presidents of these institutions are often less scholarly than Negroes who have served under them. By law and custom, the white presidents and teachers of Negro schools are prevented from participating freely in the life of the Negro. They occupy, therefore, a most uncomfortable dual position. When the author once taught in a school with a mixed facility, the white woman connected with the institution would bow to him in patronizing fashion. When on the campus but elsewhere, she did not see him. A white president of one Negro school never entertains a Negro in his home, preferring to shift such guests to the students' dining room. Another white president of a Negro college maintains on the campus a guest cottage, which Negroes can enter only as servants. Still, another such functionary does not allow students to enter his home through the front door. Negroes trained under such conditions without protest become downright cowards, and in life will continue as slaves in spite of their nominal emancipation. What different method of approach or what sort of appeal would make to a Negro child that he cannot be made as well by a white teacher? Someone asked not too long ago. To be frank, we must concede that there is no particular body of facts that Negro teachers can impart to children of their own race that may not be just as easily presented by persons of another race if they have the same attitude as Negro teachers. But in most cases, race hate, segregation, and terrorism make such a thing impossible. The only thing to do in this case, then, is to deal with the situation as it is. So let me do a quick check and make sure, because I don't have my headphones on, and you're going to hear a little feedback possibly. I just want to make sure that we're still broadcasting. And okay. You're going to hear a little feedback possibly. All right. Cool. All right. Yet we should not take the position that a qualified white person should not teach in a Negro school. For certain work which temporarily some white folks may be able to do better than the Negroes, there can be no objection to such service. But if the Negro is to be forced to live in the ghetto, he can more easily develop out of it under his own leadership than under that which is superimposed. The Negro will never be able to show all of his originality as long as his efforts are directed from without by those who socially proscribe him. Such friends will unconsciously keep him in the ghetto. Herein, however, the emphasis is not upon the necessity for separate systems, but upon the need for common sense schools and teachers who understand and continue in sympathy with those whom they instruct. Those who take the position to the contrary have the idea that the education is merely a process of imparting information. One who can give out these things or devise an easy plan for doing so, then is an educator. In a sense, this is true, but it accounts for most of the troubles of the Negro. Real education means to inspire people to live more abundantly, to learn to begin with life as they find it easier and make life better. But the instruction so far given in Negroes in colleges and universities has worked to the contrary. In most cases, such graduates have merely increased the number of malcontents who offer no program for changing the undesirable conditions about which they complain. One should rely upon protest only when it is supported by a constructive program. Unfortunately, Negroes who think as the author does and dare express themselves are branded as opponents of interracial cooperation. As a matter of fact, however, Negroes are the real workers in carrying out a program of interracial effort. Cooperation implies equality of the participants in the particular task at hand. On the contrary, however, the usual way now is for the whites to work out their plans behind closed doors, have them approved by a few, Negroes serving nominally on a board, and then employ a white or mixed staff to carry out their program. This is not interracial cooperation. It is merely the idea of calling upon the inferior to carry out the orders of the superior. To express it in a post-classic language, as did Jesse O. Thomas, the Negroes do the cooing, while the whites do the operating. The unsound attitude of the friends of the Negro is due to the persistence of the medieval idea of controlling underprivileged classes. Behind closed doors, these friends say you need to be careful in advancing Negroes to commanding positions unless it can be determined beforehand that they will do what they are told to do. You can never tell when some Negroes will break out and embarrass their friends. After being advanced to positions of influence, some of them have been known to run amok and advocate social equality or demand for their race the privileges of democracy when they should restrict themselves to education and religious development. It is often said, too, that the time is not right for Negroes to take over the administration of their institutions, for they do not have the contacts for raising money. But what becomes of this argument when we remember what Booker T. Washington did for Tuskegee and observe what R.R. Moulton and John Hope are doing today? As the first Negro president of Howard University, Mordecai W. Johnson has raised more money for that institution among philanthropists than all his former presidents combined. Furthermore, if after 3 generations the Negro colleges have not produced men qualified to administer their affairs, such an admission is an eloquent argument that they have failed ingloriously and should be immediately closed. Recently, someone asked me how I connected my criticism of the higher education of the Negroes with new developments in this sphere, and especially with the 4 universities in the South, which are to be made possible by the millions obtained governments, boards, and philanthropists. I believe the establishment of these 4 centers of learning at Washington, Atlanta, Nashville, and New Orleans can be so carried out as to mark an epoch of the new development of the Negro race. On the other hand, there is just as much possibility for a colossal failure of the whole scheme. If these institutions are to be the replica of universities like Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Chicago, if the men who are to administer them and teach in them are to be the products of roll-top desk theorists who have never touched the life of the Negro, the money thus invested will be just as profitably spent if it is used to buy peanuts to throw at the animals in a circus. Some of the thought behind the new educational movement is to provide in the South for educating the Negroes who are now crowding northern universities, especially the medical schools, many of which will not admit Negroes just because of the racial friction in hospital practice. In the rush merely to make special provisions for these undesirable students, however, the institutions which are to train them may be established on false ideas and make the same blunders of the smaller institutions which have preceded them. It will hardly help a poised patent to give him a large dose of poison. In higher institutions for Negroes organized along lines required for people differently circumstanced. Some few, many profit by being further grounded in the fundamentals. Others may become more in depth in the exploitation of other people. And a smaller number may cross the divide and join the whites in useful service. But the large majority of the products of such institutions will increase rather than diminish the load which the masses have had to carry ever since their emancipation. Such ill prepared workers will have no foundation upon which to build. The education of any people should begin with the people themselves. But Negroes thus trained have been dreaming about the ancients of Europe and about those who have tried to imitate them. In a course at Harvard, for example, students were required to find out whether Pericles were justly charged with trying to supplant the worship of Jupiter with that of Juno. Since that time, Negroes thus engaged have learned that they would have been much better prepared for work among the Negroes in the Black Belt if they had spent that time learning why John Jasper of Sandumu fame joined with Joshua in contending that the planet stood still in the middle of the line when he fought the battle the second time. Talking the other day with one of the men now given the millions to build the 4 Negro universities in the South. Okay, that's our timer. However, I find that he is in the opinion that the accredited institutions can be established in mushroom fashion with the theorists out of touch with these people. In other words, you can go almost anywhere and build a $3 million plant. Place in charge a white man to do what you want to accomplish, and in short, while he can be secure or have trained to order the men necessary to make a university. We want here, he will say, a man who has his master's degree in English. Send me another who has his doctor's degree in sociology. And I can use one more in physics. Now, experience has shown me that the men of his type may fill in, but a university cannot be established with such raw recruits. The author once had some experience in trying to amend college in this fashion. And the result was a story that would make an interesting headline for the newspapers. When Dr. William Bainey Harper was establishing the University of Chicago, he called to the leadership of the various departments only men who had distinguished themselves in the creative world. Some had advanced degrees and some had not. Several of them have never done any formal graduate work at all. All of them, however, were men whose thought was moving the world. It may be argued that the Negroes have no such men and must have them trained, but such a thing cannot be forced as we are doing now. It must be, it would be much better to stimulate the development of the more progressive teachers of the old than experiment with the novices produced by the degradation of the higher education. The degradation of the doctorate especially dawned upon the author the other day more clearly than ever when a friend of his had rushed into his office saying, I have been trying to see you for several days. I have just failed to get a job for which I had been working, and I'm told that I cannot expect a promotion until I get my doctor's degree. That is what it's called. He could not even pronounce the words, but he is determined to have his doctor's degree to get the job in sight. This shameful status of higher education is due in a large measure to low standards of institutions with a tendency towards the diploma procedure. To get a job or to hold one, you go in and stay until they grind you out a doctor's degree. And you do not have to worry any further. They assume The assumption is that almost any school will be glad to have you thereafter, and you will receive a large salary. Investigation has shown, however, that men who have the doctorate not only lose touch with the common people, but they do not as much creative work as those of less formal education. After having this honor conferred upon them, these so-called scholars often rest on their oars. Few persons have thought of the seriousness of this inedera among men who have put in the lead of things because of the meeting statutory requirements of frontier universities which are not on the frontier. The General Education Board and the Julius Rosenwald Fund have a policy which may be a partial solution of the underdeveloped Negro college instructors problem. These foundations are given Negro teachers scholarships to improve themselves for work in the sphere in which they are now laboring in the South. These boards, as a rule, do not send one to school to work for a doctor's degree. If they find a man of experience and good judgment showing possibilities for growth, they will provide for him to study a year or more to refresh his mind with whatever there is new in his field. Experience has shown that teachers thus helped later have done much better work than doctors of philosophy made to order. Northern universities, moreover, cannot do graduate work for Negroes along certain lines when they are concentrating on the educational needs of people otherwise circumstanced. The Graduate School for Negroes studying chemistry is with George W. Carver at Tuskegee. At least 100 youths should wait daily upon the words of this scientist to be able to pass to the generations unborn his great knowledge of agricultural chemistry. Negroes desiring to specialize in agriculture should do it with workers like T.M. Campbell and B.F. Hubert among the Negro farmers of the South. In education itself, the situation is the same. Neither Columbia nor Chicago can give an advanced course in the Negro ritual education, for their work in education is based primarily upon what they know of the educational needs of the whites. Such work for Negroes must be done under the direction of the trailblazers who are building schools, houses, and reconstructing the educational program of those in the backwoods. Leaders of this type can supply the foundation upon which a university of realistic education must be established. We offer no argument here against earning advanced degrees, but these should come as honors conferred for training crowned with scholastic distinction, not to enable a man to increase his salary or find a better paying position. The schools which are now directing attention exclusively to these external marks of learning will not contribute much to the uplift of the Negro. In Cleveland, not long ago, the author found at the Western Reserve University something unusually encouraging. A native of Mississippi, a white man trained in Northern University and now serving as a professor in one, has under him in sociology a Negro student from Georgia. For his dissertation, this Negro is collecting the sayings of his people in everyday life, their morning greetings, their remarks about the weather, their comments on things which happen around them, their reactions to things which strike them as unusual, their efforts to interpret life as the paranormal passes before them. This white Mississippian and black Georgian are on the right way to understand the Negro, and if they do not fall out about social equality, they will serve the Negro much better than those who are trying to find out whether Henry VIII lusted more after Anne Boleyn than after Catherine or Aragon, or whether Elizabeth was justly styled as more untruthful than Philip II of Spain. Okay, so we will pick up on chapter 5, the failure to learn to make a living, next Wednesday. I'm enjoying this so far. Yes. Very good. Very good. Very good so far. Yes. Thank you all for coming out. So after each reading, I will indeed make it public. But during the readings, they will definitely be private. I don't want the chat to be disturbed and riddled with nonsense. Yes, Wednesday, every Wednesday. The readings themselves will be, the live readings will be private. Then I'll make them public. People can say what they want in the comment section, like under the video, but during the live chat, I don't want any nonsense going on. And I will put each reading in a playlist. So if anybody needs to go back and find, any reading, they can. And they will be labeled. So now that I know which chapters we read, which is 1 through 4, I will come back and title this chapters 1 through 4. So it'll be like that. So it should be very easy and specific for you guys to know that this is 1 through 4. And so in 1 hour, we got through 4 chapters. Not bad. And let me see how many chapters it has. $17. It took me a minute because I'm dog tired, and these are Roman numerals. Yeah, 17. So yeah, but they're very short chapters. I gotta take a picture of this cover because I haven't really seen this cover online. It's showing a picture of it looks like a female with a lock on her head. I know that's representative or something, but the actual book cover has a picture of him on it. Very serious looking. So yeah, I've been waiting to read this. Yep. I'm just double checking. No, okay, so 18. I missed one. I missed the mark. So 18. It has 18 chapters. It's the last one is the study of the Negro. I don't know if there's I'm disappointed that Michael didn't make it. This wow. This book is I think this book is gonna get very deep. It's deep already to me. I mean, I don't know. I don't care if all the videos I do is only reading books. In fact, I wouldn't mind it that way. You know what I'm saying? Because like I said, I have over 7,000 books, and these books are very deep. And this book, I don't know. Would y'all like to do like a discussion, like how? And if so, how would you like to do it? Like, would you like to have a panel discussion after each reading, like on the next day? Because I know it's kind of late now, so that would be kind of probably a little unfair. Because I kind of want to discuss some of what we read. But I think it would help better if you guys had a copy. Because like some of the books I do have in PDF form, and I could for everybody who signed up, I could issue a copy. But like with this one, I just have physical copies, so I can't. So there's no way for you guys to like look back at the chapters to, you know, kind of go back over what we read, and then we can discuss it, because you're not going to really remember everything. But there was so much about what was read that was just deep. I don't know that I want to have the discussion public, but just like for everybody who signed up, like I would like to have just like a brief little, maybe a 1-hour discussion. I'm trying to think of a way that I could get I mean, because if it's only a few chapters, maybe I could take a picture of it if need be and email it to you if that's what we need to do. Right. Because I find I'm itching to have a discussion about these chapters. So you want to try to get together tomorrow and have a discussion about it? And then maybe by tomorrow, some of the other people who couldn't make it, because I didn't want to try, I didn't want to do it this late. I was trying to do it a little earlier. And we also have a mom and her homeschool son is going to be joining on this too. So I want to try to let the others get a chance to listen in and see if maybe we can all come together tomorrow. I'm going to email everybody and see if we can get together tomorrow. I'm trying to think. Tomorrow's Thursday. Yeah. I got it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just got to get some orders out. That's no problem. Yeah, because I really want to discuss the author. So I think before we go any further, we should discuss the author a little bit. Because at this point, I definitely want to talk about him. And so I'm gonna pull him up, and we can talk about him a little bit because I'm very intrigued to talk about him. And he mentioned George Washington Carver. That's like my #1 guy right there. I mean, he dropped a lot of names. Like, I'm impressed with this book a great deal. A great deal. I should have read it earlier, though. I'm extremely tired. And I've been talking all day, but like, yeah. I definitely want to have a discussion. So yeah, let's do that. You said you're supposed to do another live stream with a young woman who wants to talk about the Central Park 5. Okay, what time? Do you know what time you're going to be doing it? Because I want to, even though I haven't seen it, I have, oh, you know what? I'm going to go back and watch those interviews tomorrow too while I'm working. Do you know what time you're going to be doing that? Okay. All right. Well, we just coordinate around all those who can attend, because I know that, the students are homeschooled, and so everybody else's schedules, whatever. So we'll see, whoever can attend will be there, and those who can't will just, catch the playback. But I definitely want to do a discussion. I want to try to have a discussion after each read. But so far, his breakdown, I was thinking Brother Rob was gonna come in. He sent a message to say he was coming. So I don't know if he dipped in and came out. Again, it's a little later than what I had hoped. And that's my fault, because I went a little too long with those other live streams. So I was trying to make it earlier and keep it like maybe above 5 o'clock. Because I know it's weekdays and people, you know, be getting close to their bedtimes or whatever. But I am just drained from being on YouTube. So I'm so tired of these. Okay, you know what? I'm not gonna start. I'm not gonna start talking about other stuff. All right, so that was great. I enjoyed these chapters a great deal. A great deal. I don't even know if he has any more works. So I'm gonna have to check out his other stuff. I don't know. I guess somebody recommended this book and I got it. And I'm glad I did. I had it for a while. Very good. Very good read. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this out. And I appreciate everybody who came through. And I would definitely send out emails tomorrow morning so we can try to coordinate a time for having the first 3 chapter follow-ups. And the next reading will be on Wednesday. All right, so you guys have a lovely evening. Peace.